But I've been sick for a while, so I'm not going to shake people's hands, and if I start coughing, I'll have to do a quick timeout. Because that's my introduction there, the clap. It's like a genie, come on stage. So, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Scotty Savage. I worked at Big Sky as a forecaster, ski patroller, and then snow safety director for some time. And then about 4 years ago, I had a little knee injury and a whole bunch of surgeries later, so I've been kind of down and not working in the field for 4 years, which gives you a lot of time to read all kinds of things. So this talk and a bunch of other things I've done recently are kind of a result of that, of being injured and having the time to read about things that you never would have thought you had any time in a million years to read about. So intuition, gut instinct, hunches, it's all the same thing for the purposes of what we're going to talk about. And more importantly, how they come about, something called intuitive decision making. So why does it matter? What's the deal with intuitive decision making? Well, it's something that I kind of got interested in back about 3 years ago when I was hurt. I started looking at some professional avalanche close calls with a guy, Ron Siemenhuis, and we did a little study on that, and we found that in these professional near misses and close calls that the vast majority of them, it wasn't just technical snowpack issues, just really tricky snow conditions that would trip people up. It tended to be something with the decision-making process, that things that both the people who got caught and any reasonable observer who read what happened to them later would go back and say, you know what, this was preventable. This person, they know a lot more than that. How did this catch them? So that happened a lot of the time, and that was our clue. Something's going on here with the decision-making with the professionals. Other studies have found similar things, that it's not just snowpack issues, and that obviously matters. You got to know what's going on with the snow. But then we also need to learn more about how we make decisions. And other industries have done the same thing for a long time, actually. They have money, like the airline industries. They do a lot of training on how to make decisions. We'll hear about that, I think, a little later from Rumsey. Military applications, like Chris Robinson, he'll talk about that a little later too. How they spend time teaching people how to make decisions, not just about the technical nature of things. So that's kind of where I got interested in it, and why does it matter? That's my quick answer to that question. So, why does it matter? There you go. How about that? So back when, got a little bit of an introduction into decision making. A guy named Timothy Wilson did an experiment where he had two groups of women. And he got them to do this bogus experiment. He didn't tell them it was bogus. And then at the end of it, the first group, he's going to give them posters for a gift that they could take home. So they got to choose from 5 posters. This is back a while ago, as you can see. So, young women back in this time frame. Am I right, Janet? Is this kind of the hot stuff? Which one do you like?
Which would you choose?
She looks like a paunch person. So they were allowed to just choose one. They just picked the one that they wanted and took it home. And then the second group, he asked them, okay, you guys get to pick a poster, as a gift. Thanks a lot for doing our experiment. But I want you to tell me what you like and what you don't like about each of them before you make your choice. Then make your choice after that. Kind of the old Ben Franklin method. If you're going to make a decision, you write down the pros and cons, you weigh all of it out, and then you make your best choice, you analyze it, and that's going to give you the right answer, right? Well, they found that that's not how it worked. It was kind of unexpected. They went back and then talked to these 2 groups 4 weeks later, and the group that just chose their poster, they didn't have to say what they liked and what they didn't like. They were a lot more satisfied, way happier, no regrets. They liked the poster. The other group had a lot of regrets. They weren't happy with it at all. They made the wrong choice, in a nutshell. So that was one of the first experiments that psychologists started to clue into, hey, something's going on here. That just analyzing things, making lists, maybe that's not the way to make the best decisions. So what we're going to do today with this talk, I'm going to lay a little bit of a foundation for a lot of things that we're going to hit on in all these other talks. Just about some ideas on how decision making works. It's not going to be my ideas. This is kind of a compilation of what the psychological, cognitive psychologists think about this, about decision-making processes. We'll look at intuition, how does it work? And then can we use it to make better decisions? How can we manage our decision-making using intuitions? So one idea on how these things happen.
Hey man, what's that? It's my crystal ball. It looks like a snow globe. Nuh-uh, it's real. Here, watch.
The crystal ball theory.
Free Doritos at the office today? Think that's a yes!
It's effective in some situations.
That big promotion? Promotion? Not in your future.
But not effective in all situations. And that's one thing that I'll bring up my caveat that, we're going to talk a lot about intuitive decision making. That's a really powerful tool, but you can't just rely on it. You can't just say, well, that was my hunch, so that's what I'm doing. I thought it said center punch it, open it, even though everything else is telling you no. So I will say that's a caveat. Remember that guy throwing it at his boss. He wasn't getting the free Doritos. So there is a time and a place for everything. So Gary Klein, he's a cognitive psychologist that was doing some research work studying firefighters for the Army. And his hypothesis was that when people make decisions in these experience-based fields, that they would consider two options, rather than considering like 4 or 5 or 6. This is back in the 80s. So they used to think that people would come up with a bunch of options and then consciously analyze which one's going to work the best and choose that. His idea was that there would only be 2. And he started interviewing firefighters with decisions, and he would get stories like some firefighters went into a building and the report was a kitchen fire, and they got in there a ways in, and after being in there, he thought, you know what, something's right, we got to get out of here now. And then like 20 seconds after that, the whole thing went up in flames and the floor collapsed because there was a huge fire that wasn't in the kitchen, it was in the basement. And it just started to show in the kitchen with some smoke and some fire. I'd ask him, how do you know that? He's like, what did you do to decide? What did you compare that with? How did you come to that choice? Like, I don't compare it to anything. We just do it. We just act. It just happens. You just know that's the right thing. So that was a real big surprise to him. He accidentally stumbled upon this, basically. And when he came up with that idea, and thinking about it, he's got it out there a little bit. Well, I'll back up a little. He came up with, first of all, intuition is the way that we translate our experiences into action. That was his general conclusion that he came to from his initial studies with the firefighters. And then he kept working on different fields to confirm what he had found with the firefighters. So he studied NICU nurses, neonatal intensive care unit, and there's doing tests hourly on these little tiny babies, heel pricks on their foot every hour, and you see all the leads, there's all kinds of stuff going on. But these nurses that had been there for a while, they had this really powerful ability. They could walk by, just say, this baby's in trouble, something's wrong. And the doctors would say, the tests don't show anything yet. Well, they've done it. They're going to soon. And they'd be right. They intuitively know that something's going on and they need to act. And he found that with naval commanders, a whole bunch of different groups. And when he brought that out there initially to the community, he was the guy that was saying, back in the 1300s, the world is not flat, it's round. So people didn't like what he had to say. This is, a big deal. So it wasn't accepted widely for a while, but his work's become very well accepted in the meantime. He coined the term recognition prime decision making, or RPD. A lot of you guys have probably heard this before. Relies on basically 2 things. One, pattern recognition, that you're going to sense pattern, that the situation you're in, you're going to relate it to something that happened to you in your past, to a past experience. And then you're going to unconsciously do some mental simulations on whatever you did before to create a good outcome. And you're not thinking about doing this. This is just happening somewhere deep back inside with all the mice and the cobwebs. And you're going to come up with a simulation on yes or no, is this going to work for the current situation? If yes, then basically it throws it into your conscious mind that's how we're going to act. So you have this, well, here's what I need to do kind of moment. And he found that in 80 to 95% of the decisions that these folks in kind of high consequence, experience-based fields make, that they were using this mechanism, RPD, recognition prime decision making. So quick one here, what do you see there? Good, bad, scary, no, yes? What's your hunch? Someone throw it out there.
Looks good.
We're all scared. Looks good.
Conditions are changing.
Why do you think it looks good?
It's a sunny day with fresh snow.
It's true, sunny day with fresh snow. Maybe that's the right cue, maybe the wrong cues. And this day it was good. A couple things. There is no surface slab, right? It's fresh snow. There's not that much of it. It's pretty shallow. No one's sinking in very far. You can see some kind of frozen tundra. This is the south face, and it's like after the next 5 days while it's really sunny and just bakes everything in the lava, and then it snows 4 inches after that and it's sunny. That's what this day is, basically, in a nutshell. So it's not real spooky. But most of you get some sort of a sense right away, an initial impression. And that's what that RPD is.
Something question for you on that.
Yeah.
Is, I've been thinking about just this type of slide showing thing and being not where that picture was taken. A lot of people have preconceived notions immediately on recognizing that and a history behind it, whereas someone, say, from Bridgeport, who's never been to Big Sky or anywhere else, would have an entirely different frame to be looking at that.
Yeah. No, it's true. There's a ton of background, and I've spent a lot. This is the upper A to Z shoots. Like A, B, C, basically, there, or C, D, E. But near the west wall of the Big Sky, it's an area where there's an ugly terrain trap below it, and due south face and real high stakes terrain where if there's a slide that's 2 feet deep, you're probably going to get buried 15 feet deep in debris down there. So it's not a place where you go all the time, which is, there's a lot of background information there, for sure. So moving on, Daniel Kahneman, another brilliant researcher. He's won a Nobel Prize. He's a psychologist, economist. He and his partner, Amos Tversky, they've done a lot of work on decision making over the years. And he proposed 2 distinct decision-making mechanisms. Here's the first one. What's the answer to that? Thoughts now. Where's Dan Miller when you need him? Not here yet. 154. Okay, the next one. Say when you guys come up with the answer, let me know what it is. Just blurt it out.
Happy.
Happy. That's right. It's a lot faster, isn't it? So that's intuitive. The first one, that's analytical reasoning, and that's intuitive right there. So Kahneman's 2 different mechanisms, we're going to characterize them each a little bit. Intuitive, fast execution, reasoned or analysis, really slow. Slow execution, right? And I'll print out, anyone who wants these, you can get my email and I'll print out some notes. So if you don't want to try to write down everything that's on here, I can print out notes from this presentation and send it to you. No problem. Another exercise here to characterize something. You guys got to wake up. Do we need to go to clap again? So everyone needs to say aloud the color of the objects on the following slides. Can you do that?
Yellow, green, purple, blue, red.
Ah! So that right there demonstrates another feature and problem with the intuitive decision-making mechanism. It's involuntary, it's automatic. Even though it said, now I can't even remember. It said blue, so everyone says blue, even though it's red. And that's just that involuntary, that intuitive, you're used to it, it's automatic, it's fast. Sometimes it's wrong. So it can trip you up, that intuitive mechanism. Versus a reasoned analysis, people that did say red, and there are probably a couple, usually there's a couple that don't say blue, it was slower. They're the ones who said it after they said blue. So it's voluntary, it's controlled, but it is slower. Intuitive is slow learning because it's based on experience. It takes a lot of time to get that experience so you can really make good use of that intuitive mechanism. Versus the reasoned analysis is a lot more flexible. You can learn algebra in a relatively quick amount of time compared to learning that because your feet are a little bit warm and the whole building's quieter, that there's a fire below you in the basement that you didn't know that existed, rather than in the kitchen where it was reported. That takes a lot of time to learn that. So another one, driving. And driving, what do you think? Is that intuitive or is that reasoned? Both, yeah. Well, I'll say what makes me a lot of the time think it's pretty intuitive is that I ride my bike to school with my son in the morning a fair amount of time. And we'll be going across the parking lot, and I look pretty closely at what's going on. So you have all these soccer moms with a phone in one hand, putting on some lipstick or drinking coffee in the other, while they're messing with a kid in the back seat and driving at the same time. And they generally don't run into me most of the time in the parking lot at school. So it has to be pretty intuitive, because it's not taking a lot of effort for them to do, and it's kind of experience-based, generally driving. But how about that? Anyone drive in Ireland? No fair majority answer in this one. Has anyone done that, where you're driving on the other side of the road, sitting on the right side of the car? How about that? Does that take effort to do? It is brutal. I've only done it once, and it is terrifying. So that's definitely not intuitive. You have to use that reasoning, that analytical part of your mind to make that happen. So intuitive is relatively effortless, but the reason analysis it takes a lot of effort. It's effortful. And another exercise here, that ABC, everyone can see that, right? 12, 13, 14. So in that first one, the intuitive part of your mind, even though it looked weird, but you still understood that it was a B, even though it was a 13. But then you look down below, and so, okay, now it makes sense. So the intuitive part, intuitive decision making, and that mechanism allows you to kind of fill in the blanks. So these little blind spots, it'll relieve that ambiguity and fill that in with something so it's meaningful. So even though there's a gap between the 1 and the 3, it looks like a B that's just a little funny and stupid looking, but most people can still understand it's a B. Versus the reasoned approach, it's more rule governed. You're going to say, that's not a B. I don't know what that is. It shouldn't have a space between the line and the round part of the B. Versus associative. You can understand the patterns, that pattern recognition with the intuitive process. And then one other thing that Kahneman brings up, this word, vomit, just by seeing that, your mind and your body is going to associate that with a lot of different things. It's hard to believe, but when you see that, your pulse rate's going to go up a tiny bit, your pupils are going to dilate a little bit, you're going to start sweating a little, you're going to recoil ever so subtly in your chair, you're going to get more sensitive to other words like anchovy, smell, rotten, tequila, depending on if you like tequila or not. I wouldn't guess that. But it's your body, it's tied into all kinds of real subtle responses in your body that the reasoning part of your mind isn't. So it's really powerful from that standpoint, the associative properties with that. So the last thing then I'll hit with Kahneman, with his thoughts, he's done a lot of work on heuristics also. And his idea that heuristics are basically cognitive biases, that they tend to get in the way of the intuitive decision-making process with something called heuristic traps. Who's heard about that before? Most people? And I'm going to spend a little time going into heuristics more with what another scientist thinks about them. But his main thrust with heuristics, their role is that they get us in trouble. They interfere with that intuitive decision-making process. Things like scarcity heuristic. You guys remember what that is? What's that cause? What kind of avalanche accidents? Powder fever. It's going to run out. You know, you're up there and there's not that much of it. I got to get mine. So you're going to ski something maybe that you wouldn't otherwise. So that's his feeling on heuristics. Where the next guy we're going to talk about, his name's Gerd Gigerenzer. Try to say that a bunch quickly. And he's another really powerful scientist who, he did a lot of the work that Malcolm Gladwell made famous as kind of a pop psychologist. He's the science behind that. He runs the adaptive behavior department at the Max Planck Institute over in Germany. Really sharp guy. And the basis of his the driving force behind his idea on intuitive decision-making is heuristics are good, and we use them when we use them the right way. When we use the right heuristic in the right environment, that they help us make decisions, so that they're really important. And we're going to go over a couple of them here to try to remember when I first saw Ian McCammon's talk on heuristics maybe 10, 12 years ago. It was a long time ago at one of the ISSWs. It's kind of like, wow, I kind of get it, but I don't know. I think heuristics might be one of those four-lettered words. It's not tangible. I can't feel it. I don't really have a good grasp of it. Does anyone else feel like that? Does anyone else still feel like that? Probably, I would think. So hopefully this will make things a little simpler. Another exercise here. I'm going to put someone up in the middle. Tell me which piece of fruit they want. Just say it as soon as you know. That's right, they want the apple. And this is what Gigerenzer would call the mind-reading heuristic. It's not a formal heuristic, but it's something that's a simple rule of thumb that if you want something, you're looking at it. So if someone is looking at something, that's what they want. And really young kids understand this. Once they're about 3 years old, he's found that they understand that if you see someone who's looking at something, that's what they're choosing. But then you have autistic kids, when they're a lot older than that, they don't make that connection. They understand that the person's looking at something, but they don't understand, they don't have that capability to use that heuristic and understand that because they're looking at it, that means they want it. Once they're told that that's what it means, they're fine. Even autistic adults. It's really interesting that the way that with autism, that part of your brain, there's some issues with the intuitive decision-making process. So another heuristic here. Any baseball players other than Bart Mitchell? Quick video here that does a good job. It's an introduction to one.
Was on a strict 90-pitch count. And a great catch.
What a grab.
Field by the Moss. Tim Smalling hit it on the nose, but Zeke Moss. The Miami center fielder with a lot of speed making that catch.
So catching a ball is really a difficult, it's not a simple thing. Get another quick view of it.
This ball is hit on a line, and DeVos gets back and stretches out and somehow comes up with that ball. I thought off the bat there was no way that was going to.
So when you're learning how to catch a ball when you're a little kid, does someone teach you how to do that by saying, okay, come up with the differential equations in calculus to consider the trajectory, the acceleration, the atmospheric conditions, and decide that you're here, it's going to end up at that point over there. They don't tell you that, right? And researchers actually tried that with experts, with some college baseball players, saying, why do you just run and keep looking at it when obviously you know it's going to be over there? So just run really fast to that point and then look back up and catch it. It doesn't work. They drop it. They can't get there as well. Catching a ball or intersecting any moving object, we use something called the gaze heuristic to do that. And how that works, we have a really, one of the lucky things about humans and a lot of birds and mammals that we can do a good job tracking moving objects against the background. So that's a requirement. That's not the heuristic. But then say someone hits a fly ball and you're standing here, so you're going to look up at the ball. And the angle that your gaze takes to where the ball is, that angle needs to stay constant, and you'll basically catch the ball. If the angle starts increasing, you're having to look up. That means it's going further. So you need to run back so you can keep that angle constant. If the angle starts decreasing, then you need to run forward so you can get that gaze back up. Does that make sense? Another simple rule of thumb that's how you can catch a baseball. So these things, how this intuitive decision making, his idea on how it works is that we take these simple rules of thumb or heuristics and we use them, and then they take advantage of evolved capacities of the brain, which is basically experience or a lot of practice. So it's not going to work unless you have the experience. Think about it, catching a ball, no one's good at it for a while. But the more you do it, you get that experience so you understand how that works. And those two heuristics, the mind reader and the gaze heuristic, are what he calls automatic. They're going to work in any environment, doesn't matter. Which, unfortunately, most of them aren't like that, which is where you get in trouble. You need to pick the right environment, the right time to use the heuristic. You can't use the wrong one at the wrong time. So, according to Gigerenzer, intuition, gut feelings, refers to a judgment that appears quickly in consciousness and whose underlying reasons we're not fully aware of. So, similar to the other guys, it just kind of comes to you. You don't really know why, and it's strong enough to act upon. So he's, pretty similar. Whether it's Klein or Kahneman or Gigerenzer, they're all thinking pretty much the same thing there. One of the important parts, in a video that will demonstrate something here. Something called the speed accuracy trade-off.
Just lost the back show once frozen. No holes. It's not a fluke. And don't have no hole. It's Danish. Hey guy. No, 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 no. No, 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 no. Missed just that one.
Sorry, cut that out. Thank you very little. I need my gratuitous Caddyshack in any presentation I do, pretty much. So the speed accuracy trade-off. What the speed accuracy trade-off says, it's a long-held psychological principle that the faster you do something, if you increase the speed at which you do something, the accuracy decreases. So if you do something faster, you're not going to be as good at it. People, that's been around for a long time. Gigerenzer wanted to test this, so he and some colleagues at the Institute, they did a really neat experiment there with comparing novice and expert golfers. And they had them hit putts both very quickly. They could take 3 seconds or less to line up the putt and hit it. And then they could also take as long as they wanted to. So how do you think we'll consider the novice group, a bunch of hacks. How did they do when they had to putt quickly? They did really poorly. So the speed accuracy trade-off held for them. And then when they got to take a lot of time, they did better. They improved. So when they had time to think about it and get things dialed in, they did better. The experts, on the other hand, they had significantly better results when they had to do it quickly. If they were forced to take more time, or if they could take more time, they didn't putt as well. Really interesting result that flew in the face of the speed accuracy trade-off of that principle. And then he also did it the same thing with the novices and the experts, or relative novices, while being told to think about something in their stroke. Like think about keeping your hands still while you're putting. So kind of a distraction. And that really helped the novices. They putted better when they were thinking about that. The experts, however, when they were told to concentrate on their stroke, they didn't do as well. They putted poorly. They did better when they were thinking about nothing. So it's some interesting results, and it was kind of a similar result in another study. They had some indoor handball players, team handball. It's like water polo inside. You guys know what it is. Probably played it in gym class, right? Olympic sport, too. One of those. But you just don't, hopefully there are no team handball players. I don't want to offend anyone. But they had these guys do a computer simulation of it where they showed some action and got to a specific spot and then quickly asked them, okay, where's the next pass? And when they did that, and it was evaluated by coaches and other professional players to rate whether it was a good decision or not. The first decision that they came to was by far the best. So they would say, where should you go with the ball? And their first idea right away. And then, what's the next best idea? And they would come up with another decision. And how accurate or how correct the decisions were as judged by other experts decreased with every choice in succession. It's really interesting that the first one was the best idea, and each successive choice was worse. Which doesn't make sense with the speed accuracy trade-off either. I think that the more time they had to think about it, the better it would be. So from this, he kind of became a little perplexed, but then got into it more, and Gigerenzer that is, and determined that one of the big overriding theories he has is less is more when it comes to making decisions in experience-based environments like that. That intuitions spring from simple rules of thumb that extract only a few pieces of information from a complex environment. So in a way, all that background noise can get in the way if you're thinking about other things. This is for experts, not for novices, but for experts. So what tools in the Avalanche world can you think of that might try to take advantage of this concept? Extract a few pieces of information from a complex environment. Anyone think of anything? Come on. What?
Naturals.
No, I'm looking for more tools that we can use. What's that? That's one, yeah. And that one actually gets into that, and what I'll touch on later is something called a fast and frugal tree. But something that Ian McCammon came up with It's a kind of fruit, too. Yeah, lemons, right? That's exactly what lemons are. You just want to pick those few pieces of information. And then another thing, bullseye data. It gets at just the important information, right? You don't worry about that background noise. So another experiment here that'll demonstrate a really important heuristic that Gigerenzer came up with. And we'll kind of replicate an experiment. You guys need to answer this question. Just blurt it out when you know the answer. Which city has larger population, Milwaukee or Detroit? See, there's a lot of disagreement, isn't there? And that's because we recognize both of those cities. So it makes it hard to answer that. Detroit's bigger. But if you ask a bunch of students, and they did this from a college in Germany, which is bigger, Detroit or Milwaukee, they'd heard of Detroit and they hadn't heard of Milwaukee, they answer that question far more accurately than the American geography students, who you would think would answer it more accurately, but they don't. And that's based on something called the recognition heuristic, that all other things being equal, if someone recognizes one of two choices, they're going to assign more validity to it than the other one, which is a really powerful heuristic. It's basically what I say first in and last out. So they found that at 18 months, people are starting to use this. Even, that's well documented. Before that, though, you have little babies who they can recognize their parents or their mom when they're really young, like minutes or hours. So it starts happening really fast. And then Alzheimer's patients and people with severe amnesia or head injuries, they can still recognize pictures of people that they know or famous people. They can't recall who it is or why, but if you just ask them, do you recognize either one of these pictures? They can. Do you know what it is? No. So it's basically one of the first, it's such a powerful part of our brains that it's one of the first things we can do and the last things that we lose. Needs less is more to function, because if you know the answer to everything, then it won't work. There is no bias. You can't distinguish between something you recognize and something you don't if you recognize everything, which is something that, like with autistic people who are afflicted with that they have incredible memories and they don't lose that information, that kind of selective ignorance, which actually helps in a way. It may be an evolutionary advantage for us to be a little bit spacey like myself and not be able to remember things. It helps you a little bit. This is a flexible heuristic, so we unconsciously and consciously evaluate whether we should use it, which is really important. Because if we didn't do that, and you were asked, which is a bigger city, Belgrade, Montana, or Fortaleza, Brazil? Well, I recognize Belgrade, so Belgrade. But that'd be wrong, and you'd probably be able to say that without thinking, it's not very big, so it's probably not bigger than many other cities. So it's not automatic like the gauge heuristic. You can turn it on and off. So when you have recognition and you add evaluation, it's a really powerful tool. Gigerenzer feels is behind a lot of the intuitive decision-making decisions that we make. So we'll kind of move into the next part of the talk here. Another flashback. Who's seen this before?
My spider senses are starting to tingle.
Oh yeah. Intuition. How do we get like that? How can we get better? Well, for people who aren't experts yet, one of the concepts that Gigerenzer promotes is something called fast and frugal trees, where what he means by that is a series of binary choices, and this is the evaluator, that you're going to say yes or no, move on to the next one, yes or no, so just keep it really simple, and it's trying to get at this really simple and more intuitive process, but teach novices which heuristics they're supposed to be looking at. So in contrast to decision-making trees, which would be more like multiple regression, nearest neighbor programs, where you have a lot of variables, really complicated, that you're weighting all these individual variables and coming up with an answer from that, doing some complex computations. a lot of the studies that he's done, these fast and frugal trees are more accurate than these really complex multiple regression analysis type models and programs. The state of Michigan still requires cardiac units to use basically a fast and frugal tree for doctors. They found that they've had a lot better results with having doctors follow that they tend to not overlook some things that they don't get distracted by the noise. So it's interesting that they are still used. It's not just theory. It's still used in places. Some intuitive do's and don'ts. All of these folks say we need to analyze it after the intuitive solution comes to us, never before. And that poster experiment, first thing, that kind of hits on that, right? That if you're making a decision that's an experience-based decision, that if you try to do the old Ben Franklin pros and cons before the intuitive choice comes, it's going to pollute it, basically. You won't come up with as good a decision as if you get that hunch, let it develop first, and then analyze that hunch. Try to figure out what it means. When your gut tells you to be afraid, you need to listen to it, figure out why after that, but you need to first say, okay, something's wrong, and accept what he calls the zone of indifference. And the zone of indifference is you get to a point when you're making decisions where it's like, well, should I put the chair here or should I put the chair here? Does it really matter? So you need to, don't waste your energy, your decision-making energy or resources on these things that really don't matter at all. That's what he calls the zone of indifference. And something that's come out of Gigerenger's research is when we make these decisions, he says that the people want to be maximizers. They want to strive for the elegant solution, the perfect solution to a problem. And instead, we're better off accepting that we can be what he calls satisficers, which means that we make an answer that's satisfying enough that it suffices. So it doesn't have to be the perfect. It has to be kind of that first best solution to the problem. So something to consider that as you're out there doing things, think, well, my initial impression or instinct was to do this, and you're still thinking about it. Is there a difference between the two? Am I trying to maximize the decision when I could just be satisficing? Does that make sense? Kinda? Get into some gray areas now. All right. So, experience. So this person, he's practicing. He's out there getting experience playing football, but is he going to get as much experience as some other people? Is he going to learn as much to really gain expertise? Probably not. You need to gain expertise through meaningful experience, and according to Gigerenzer, evolve our capacities, right? So we can make use of those rules of thumb. But we can't be either, physically or more importantly, intellectually lazy. That you can't just passively have these experiences happen to you. You want to actively think about things and critique things after the fact. That try to gain what you can from your decision-making experiences. When you're doing things after an interesting day where there were some touchy, difficult decisions, then think about it afterwards. Try to get in the habit of doing that. These guys all suggest that you want to go back and actively think about what was good, what was bad, what you might do differently next time, and try to absorb that. Don't just say, all right, glad that day's done, click. There's a time and a place for beer too. Feedback, touch on this. It needs to be immediate and unequivocal in order to have good feedback on any decisions that we have. If it's not immediate and unequivocal, if it's delayed or if it's ambiguous, we run into problems. It's not going to be good feedback. We don't know if the decision we made was a good one or not, right? How about our environment? In the mountains and snow and avalanches? Do you get immediate feedback? Sometimes, yeah. Like say if the first 15 people or the first 4,000 people ski something and it doesn't slide, it's feedback, right? Like up on Saddle Peak a couple of years ago or Liberty Bowl 4 years ago. That was feedback. Was it correct feedback? No, it depends on the scenario and the conditions, on the environment, right? And whether it's unequivocal or not, it's the same thing. That
sure, you can speak on something and it doesn't slide, but does that unequivocally say that that's stable? It could be just in the wrong spot, too high, too low. It could be 1 inch more snow and the whole thing would be unstable. So it's definitely not unequivocal. It's really tough environment. And researchers, they categorize the environment as being kind, a kind environment, or cruel/wicked environment. A kind environment is from a decision-making standpoint. A kind decision-making environment, the feedback you get is going to be relevant, unambiguous basically, versus a cruel or wicked environment.
It might not be relevant, it might be irrelevant. So what are we in there? We're kind of, it depends, right? Sometimes we're in a wicked decision-making environment. And then consequences is the other thing, the other
property with distinguishes kind versus wicked or cruel environments. Cruel environments are going to have high consequences. A lot of times we're in environments like that, right? Versus kind environments, they don't have consequences. Real low consequences, you make an accident. So it's something that makes it difficult for us to learn, to really improve on our intuitive decision-making skills. We're kind of playing against stacked deck a lot of the time with the way that the environment behaves and the way the feedback is. So really pay attention to that feedback that you're getting. And when you're making these decisions, it's tough to, you can't put too much stock in the fact that you did this, and it worked, didn't fly. So that was a successful decision-making process. Maybe it was, maybe there's more variety there. You need to be aware of that.
Then this is kind of straight from some of Gary Klein's work. And I haven't had the chance to really integrate this into a formal work environment. That's just a caveat. So I've been hurt since I really started getting interested in this. But he has some really good ideas about what can we do to become better decision makers. And his first thing is a three-step process for you, Gary. First, we need to identify and understand the decision-making requirements of the job. So understand the problem. Something that Dan Miller, one of his advisors in the Army, can't hear it. He's telling him, confidence is that feeling you get right before you realize you don't understand the problem. It's a great quote. It's really true. But really understand what are the decision-making requirements of your job. So when he says, I haven't done this, is write down a list of all the decisions you make, not just, and really get into it. So think, okay, I need to decide how many shots we're going to route. Which means what? You go deeper than that. You need to make a determination while you're down low, what the facility is going to be like, what the weather is going to be like. It really characterizes decisions that you need to make while you're at work. And then for each one of those, write down what makes it difficult. What makes that decision difficult. And then also write down what insights you might be able to gain over time or manipulate that would make that decision easier. So kind of go through that. And it'll take some time to do that. It is really valuable. Something I will say I've done this a little bit with the future in mind. And it's something that's pretty cool. And it does bring some things to life. You can understand better what you're up against, if nothing else. And then practice the difficult decisions in context. So GNFAC, decision-making exercises. You could go to 2-week-long conferences on this, and still just scratching the surface. I'm not going to touch that too much, but you high points that Gary makes. If you want to do it in kind of small groups, like 6 to 8 people, is a lot more effective than doing it in a big group like this. And a lot of people have that small groupitis. It's not a breakout into groups and chit-chat kind of thing. But you want to have it where someone formally takes time to create a really formal exercise beforehand. So they can develop a really compelling story, kind of symbiotic, pictures, everything else, so it makes you feel like you're there. And then get to a point where you create a true dilemma, where you get to put someone on the hot seat, where you can apply pressure. It's not just going through the emotions, it needs to go well. If you don't do it well, he doesn't say this, but it's from my own experience. I've done and done a lot of these. I don't know well. Kind of like trying to make wine. If you don't like the ocean, what do you make? Vinegar. It doesn't taste very good, does it? So if you don't do it right, which takes a lot of time and skill, you could just be spinning your wheels. And then review it immediately is the other key thing. When you get done doing it, you review it and go through what happened. Then reviewing decision-making experiences. So this is just real life, what happens, reviewing incidents, doing decision-making critiques. Again, try to make it formal, so it's not just
at the end of the day, everyone sits down and says, what do you think about that? That you actually create a timeline of decisions that were made beforehand, so you can refer to what happened. And then try not to lose sight of the idea is to look at the decision and not nitpick over the facts and not become a blame story session where you're just trying to crucify someone. Everybody's had kind of some thick skin about who reason about it. So you're actually looking at the decisions, not the facts that you learn.
It's different than the typical, from my experience,
Control debriefs or operational debriefs where you just talk about it. It needs more focused on decision making, not necessarily on risk.
And then here's the question: do experts need coaching?
It's something that's become more of a hot topic recently where I read an article, I can't remember what it was, but and if anyone's there, so look it up, send it to one. High-end surgeons are starting to turn to hiring coaches that'll just one-on-one, they'll fly them out, usually it's like a little mentor of theirs or someone who's a colleague, and they'll fly them out and just watch them operate for a whole day. Just watch everything they did, and then they'll spend another day compiling what's going on, and then talk about it for hours. And they'll actually coach about what's going on. And then you look at some of the best intuitive decision makers in the world. It's a famous football player, Tom Brady. And he hears it from coaches all the time. And these guys get coached. But a lot of us, myself included, and a lot of people we're kind of sensitive to being coached. We get to a point where we think that it's easy to have it happen. We think that we're enough, we don't need coaches. Where it's incredibly valuable to have a mentor or someone you trust. Whenever you get the opportunity, seek it out. You have to want to be coached to be a good student. You don't want to hear you're not going to, you're just going to be trusted. And you won't be any good. But really consider that. If you do have someone you know you trust to do that, try to hit them up hard. Because our brains, they play a lot of elaborate tricks to protect us from the bad decisions in there. So self-analysis is good, but it's not doing the same as having someone else looking at your decisions if they were there to watch them up front while it happened. Really valuable. And then I'll kind of end it with this. It's a Dan Kahneman quote that kind of sums it all up, how this process works. You're asked a complicated question and you answer a simple one. And I'll go back to saying, most of the time that works really well. It's a really powerful tool. But when you are answering that simple question, make sure it's the right question that you answer. That it isn't infallible. Can't just rely on trust or intuition and basics. That's